Utah is trying to keep a 5-star receiver in Utah, but can they do it? Well, they at least made his top 10, so that's a sign in the right direction, right? Maybe not, actually. We're going to be talking about that. Also, the coaches poll is out. Utah's not in the top 10, and a Fox Sports analyst is very high on Utah. All that and more coming up on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcast. If this is your first time listening to the show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments as well as on social media, where you can follow our show at Locked On Utes on X. This is Locked On Utes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for all those who do listen to this show every single day. Greatly appreciate the everydayers. If you're in the market for a second listen, Locked On College Football is the place for you. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our great friends at Gametime. You can download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, all caps, no spaces, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. My name is G.T. Wistricll, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined on today's show by Ryan McDonald of the Deseret News. And Ryan, this is perfect timing to have you on the show because you just covered our first topic. Yes, we're going to get into the college football coaches poll, which Kyle Whittingham does not have a vote, didn't vote in or doesn't have a vote in. One of those two things that your colleague Joe Coles reported on. But we're going to talk about that second segment, close with Joel Klatt being high on Utah and some of the reaction that's received. Got to start with Jerome Miles. The 5-star receiver in the state of Utah has a chance to become the highest rated recruit that Utah's ever gotten. Just put out his top 10. Now, if we rewind a little bit, it seemed like he was for sure going to be a Ute, honestly. Maybe for sure is a little bit of a strong step, but I know he was stealthily committed there. But once he then committed to Ole Miss and decommitted, you saw the 24/7 rankings that the crystal ball was high on Utah. Was feeling good about it. It made a lot of sense, but then some of the other offers started to pour in. We can talk about the specific schools in a second, but Ryan, I'll be honest. I think it's going to be harder for Utah to get Jerome Miles right now. Maybe they can still, I think they still have a chance to do it, but there's a concerning trend that I've noticed. Utah's the only Big 12 school. Every other school on there is SEC and Big 10. Every school that left the Pac-12 wanted to go to the SEC or the Big 10. Why was that? Because, or in Texas and Oklahoma's case, right, left the Big 12 to go there. Because the NIL resources, the TV money are more substantial. If this turns into a bidding war, and then Jerome Miles may want to go to Utah for the best reason. Utah has carved out their own NIL resource as well. But if this becomes something that's like, hey, all of these places are good fits, like one of the offers on here is like LSU, right? Like, how am I going to argue with what that LSU offense put up and if he can make more money there? Like, I think this is concerning for Utah that they're the only Big 12 school in this list and that a lot of these other teams on there are known for their more prolific passing games than Utah are.
Yeah. A lot to unpack, I think, with Jerome Miles. But everything you said in terms of, I think people thought he was probably going to end up at Utah. Then he ends up at Ole Miss, or ends up committing to Ole Miss. It's like, all right, well, maybe not. Reopens. Oh, maybe he will go to Utah after all. But like you just said, and it's interesting, a colleague of mine observed that too about the Big 12. It's like, oh yeah, he is the only Utah is the only Big 12 school. So yeah, they're battling with the big boys, Utah is, and we'll see. I do think it was interesting that Ole Miss isn't on the list anymore. Mm-hmm. I thought that was interesting. And so, I don't know what happened there, but they're fighting with Miami, LSU, Texas A&M. I know hasn't delivered in terms of, compared to the kind of players they've recruited. Mm-hmm. They've had good recruiting classes and haven't delivered. That might be changing, with the new staff that's there now. But Yeah, Utah certainly got their work cut out for them. Obviously, they have the advantage of being in Utah. And so if Jerome Miles wants to stay in Utah, go to Utah, if he doesn't, then they've got their work cut out for him. But the fact that he was silently committed there and still has them on his top 10 now makes me think he's considering staying home, and so we'll see. But yeah, they're certainly going to be in a battle with the big boys.
They are. And you make a fantastic point, bringing up Ole Miss not being in the list as well, because the two schools he was previously committed to, right, were Ole Miss and Utah. Well, clearly Utah has done something over that process better than Ole Miss did to still be in the race for Jerome Miles. And I think that is really important here too. And I want to go back to what I mentioned just about, if this becomes NIL, that's where Utah falls behind. Once again, I'm not saying that's what's most important to Jerome Miles. What I am saying is if he has a chance to go to an LSU offense, which is more known for its high prolific passing game numbers, on top of making more money on Utah. Because if this does become something where it's like, okay, I want to be maximized to my best abilities in a passing offense, as well as be compensated, that's just where the reality of the fact is. Utah is probably not going to be able to meet those thresholds that SEC and Big Ten schools are. I mean, the Big 12 Conference is thinking about changing the conference name and mimic a fraction of the power that those programs have because of the insane amounts of TV money that ESPN and Fox and everyone is throwing their way, NBC, to try to get a slice of that cash cap. So I do think this is one where Utah's still in it for Jerome Miles. Isaac Wilson being at Utah, I think that's a big thing, right? A guy he has a connection with, and he obviously is like the Utah program. And the other great thing I think that Utah is going for them, Ryan, is what did I just mention with LSU? They're more of a pass-happy offense. I'm not saying Utah will be LSU this year, but we've heard a lot about this Utah offense being more explosive. And this year feels different than the others because Brant Keithy's still here. Dorian Singer's a 1,000-yard receiver. Damian Alford had over 600 yards last year and averaged 19 yards per catch at Syracuse. And Cam Rising did not come back to Utah to hand the ball off every single play. I actually feel like this offense will be more explosive, and this is something where if Utah shows that willingness, Miles clearly has some desire to stay in state. If Utah is still on here, I think they will still have a shot for him if Utah can deliver certain benchmarks that Jerome Miles is probably looking for in his next program.
Yeah. Can I open up a can of worms that I just thought of?
Please do.
I think it might have nothing to do with it. It might end up having nothing to do with it. But I just thought of this as you were talking. I wish I would have thought of it when I was writing my story yesterday. I just thought of it when you were talking. This might give an indication of how long Kyle Whittingham has left. Because that's a big deal. And I think that's why Utah announced Morgan Scalley, officially, even though that was in his contract already. I think that's why they publicly announced that was for recruiting purposes. I think Morgan Scalley even said it himself that's why they announced it. I think this could be an indication, if and again, it might have nothing to do with it, but if Jerome Miles wants to play for Kyle Whittingham and Kyle Whittingham isn't going to be here very long, then that could be something. So I think that's something to watch with recruits in general, not just Jerome Miles, but recruits in general moving forward from here are they getting vibes, about Kyle, how long Kyle has left? So something to think about and keep an eye on, I think.
That'd be fascinating too, to know, like, and I talked about it on the show before, I think this is Kyle Whittingham's last year strictly by reading the writing that is on the walls. When we put the puzzle together, it makes a lot of sense to me that this is a natural exit point for him, but I do not know that. But I wonder how honest, like you said, how is Utah being honest with these recruits in that regard? Are they saying the exact same thing they're saying to us? I don't expect Kyle Whittingham to announce this as his last year, but it's a lot different telling the media it's his last year than telling recruits who are going to spend the next 3 years at the program. They do not want to commit to a coach who's not going to be there. But if they know they're committing to Morgan Scalley And Morgan's the one who recruits a lot of these guys too. That I think that's a different vibe and a dynamic. So that's something that's incredibly important. And especially, as you said, not just for Myles, for all of these guys, it's something to keep an eye on going forward. And we'll be curious to watch the recruitment of Jerome Miles as Utah fends off Georgia. Yep, that's right. Started with the biggest one right away. Ohio State, dang, second biggest. Michigan just won the national championship. And then we can go with a lot of these other quality programs, right? Penn State, Auburn, Miami, Texas A&M, LSU, USC, and good old Utah on there. It's a stiff pack of competition. What do all those programs I have in common? Well, pretty much all those programs, actually. I don't know if every single one is. No, I think they are. Almost every single program I just named is included in the coaches poll top 25, including Utah, except Utah is not in the top 10. I don't love that, but we are going to discuss why that is and if I think Utah was disrespected in one moment. But first, we got to talk to you about our great friends at Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app, they actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. They have fantastic last-minute deals, all-in-price views from your seat, their lowest price guarantee, with Gametime truly taking the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. There are so many fantastic features in the app that make it easy to buy your seat, like a panoramic view, which is my personal favorite. Ever buy a ticket and you're like, well, I wonder what the view from my seat's actually going to look like. That is what the panoramic seat view provides in the Gametime app. So you know exactly what kind of a deal you're getting for. There also, how about the all-in pricing? It shows you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. One of my ultimate pet peeves is when I'm going to buy tickets and then there are more surprise fees at checkout. I don't have to worry about that with Gametime. And Gametime also has a ticket lowest price guarantee where they will credit you 110% of the difference. Not to mention, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy. You can download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, capital L for locked, O for on, and all of college is capitalized. For $20 off, you can download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Ryan McDonald keeping it rolling with me on today's Locked On Utes. Coaches poll is out, preseason polls. I think the AP one actually comes out this coming Monday, so we'll have some of that to react to as well. Coaches poll dropped. Utah's at 13. We're going to talk in the next segment about Joel Klatt having them in the top 10. That's where I tend to side to agree with here. I do not think, though, I think Utah was snubbed by not being in the top 10. I think they should be a top 10 team, in my opinion. But they were not disrespected. You can absolutely make an argument that these teams are better than Utah. And in fact, that's what I want to do right now is we're going to have that discussion. So let's start off with the top 5. Georgia, actually, I'll only say top 4 for sure. Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, and Texas. I think those are clear-cut top 4. Alabama is interesting because they've had some transfers. Probably still belong up there, but another interesting one. Ole Miss, I'm good with them being above. They hit the portal hard. Jackson Dart, shout out the state of Utah. But we'll see there too. I think a lot of these other ones I can make a good argument for. I think Notre Dame at 7 is crazy. I'm sorry. I just don't think, and Marcus Freeman's a really good coach, but I just still think you need to put things together. I do not trust Riley Leonard more than I trust Cam Rising. There are pieces there that should work, but they haven't put it all together yet. So I don't love Notre Dame above Utah in that instance. And outside of that, as we keep looking there too, Michigan, they lost a lot, but I understand they still return some key pieces from the championship team. They might have some sanctions coming up too, depending on how all of that shakes out. Penn State returned some talent too. Florida State lost a lot. And I like DJU. I genuinely do, but I just don't think he's one of the 15 to 10 best quarterbacks in the sport, which I clearly think Cam Rising is. And I think, and that's more than just quarterback, obviously, but there's a lot that team lost. There's a reason they got demolished in that bowl game against Georgia rather than making it competitive. So that's another one to me. And Missouri they lost some pieces too. I'll rant about LSU in a moment. I don't like that at all, but I would have them in the top 10. Ryan, how did you react to this list?
So I do think it's important to think about with the coaches poll and probably with the AP poll too. We'll see. The AP poll might be a little bit more favorable to Utah, but I think it's important to understand and think about that. I think a lot of it is based on last season's product, what happened last season. And so Utah, what happened with last season. And so, yeah, and we have high hopes, obviously, because we live in Utah and your podcast is what it is.
Locked On Utes, baby.
um, and so I get it. I guess I'll say it this way. I think by the end of the year, that assuming all goes, assuming no injuries, and so forth, assuming health, I think that Utah is going to prove to be one of the most misranked teams at the beginning of the season. I guess I'll put it that way. Is I get it, and I'm not surprised by being at number 13. I get why, but I do think there's a really good chance that it will prove to be, Utah was ranked too low at the beginning of the season.
If we look at Utah's schedule, to me, this is where this ranking becomes so interesting, because to me, I just see a schedule where there's obviously a chance they go 9-3, 8-4, whatever. There's a chance that happens. To me, they should go no worse than 10-2 based on the schedule in which you avoid Kansas and Kansas State. You really only play 2 tough home games, in my opinion. Tough road games, the Oklahoma State game, and then the UCF game at the end of the year, I think could be challenging. But those, I just feel like this schedule
rivalry. The Utah UCF rivalry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Rivalry.
Yeah, we're all excited. We get out of the crappy Colorado rivalry, which I've been more excited for now that Deion's there, just to enter into this rivalry. And who knows? Maybe the game will be more fun and give us something. But you are absolutely right that it's quite the rivalry weekend showdown. I've ranted about that as soon as the schedule came out. I was frustrated about that. So I'm with you there. But I do think for this Utah team, if we look at their schedule, that's where these lists become so confusing. Is it the best coming into the year? Is it best by the end of the year? And I'm not trying to factor in the fact that Utah, if they win the Big 12, will have a top 4 seed. I'm just saying I simply think they're better than these teams. LSU could end up being better than Utah this year. LSU was carried by Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, and I just blanked on their other receiver's name, who's also very good. But those guys are all gone. So now it's a new quarterback who, looked good in their bowl game. And yes, they have some other were good pieces because it's LSU, but it's like, why are they just up there? Because of the name brand and power. I'm high on Utah because I've seen Cam Rising do it at the highest level when healthy 2 seasons. I've seen Brant Keithy. I've seen Dorian Singer. Sure, he's coming off a little bit of a disappointment, but I feel like I can obviously look at the other wide receivers at USC and make sense of that. I have a top 5 run defense that's pretty much intact outside of the best pass rusher. So I just feel like the losses for Utah are just so much more minimal compared to what LSU lost, where the only reason they were even ranked 13th last year was because of Jaden Daniels. And it's a similar thing with Notre Dame. There's a lot of new pieces that got to come and get fit and put together. Also, speaking of Notre Dame, I think that LSU's, I could be messing this up. I thought LSU's offensive coordinator left LSU to go to Notre Dame. That might be wrong with the way I'm saying it, but either way, there is changes to LSU. There's changes to places like Notre Dame that I just feel like are more substantial. If you want to question Utah because of the injuries, that's fine. But I feel like there's a number of programs on here that I look for, even like a Missouri. I know they still have their quarterback in Cook, and they might have the best receiver in the country, but they lost some of the real meat and potatoes of their roster. And I'm not saying Utah didn't lose key players too, but I'm looking at what they have coming back. If Utah didn't have Cam Rising, Brant Keithy, all of the elite defenders back, this is a different conversation to me. But because of what they return, I think they've earned their spot in the top 10.
Yeah, and I am kind of wondering if people didn't really take into account, they didn't have all those players last year, and now they'll have them this year. I honestly feel like it was, it's almost like it's almost like connections weren't made. I think people probably thought, they struggled last year, but those guys are coming back, so they'll be pretty good, almost without thinking, those guys are really good.
Yeah.
Cam Rising, Brant Keithy, everybody else is really good. So I don't know. I get why coaches hate talking about polls, I guess. Because to me, it's like this season, with where Utah is at number 13, this season, I'm like, I think it's wrong. I think assuming health, I think it's wrong. I think they'll end up higher than that come November.
I think this is a Utah team, to your point about people not understanding what wasn't there. Some people will read 8-5, and then they'll say things too, like, oh, they didn't beat good teams, which, first of all, winning at USC, I love in today's era, or just today's world of social media, that USC team, yes, they were 7-5. I'm not saying they were great, but they were, when Noah Fafita took over Arizona, that's a pretty good team, right? They didn't lose much. They beat the crap out of Utah. You know who beat that team? USC. You know who is still ranked in the top 25 to start the year? USC. That was a really good win for this Utah team like that. So, yes, they lost to Washington and Oregon, two of the best teams in the country. Oregon would have easily been in the playoff last year, had we had the same format that we have this year as well too. So and then that Florida team, it's still an SEC team. I love how the SEC is so high and mighty, and then you lose to Utah. I'm oh, it's a negative. I just think there's so many, and this is a Utah team. See, now I'm ranting and fired up, and I didn't want to get fired up at this time of the night. I'm supposed to be calming down and getting ready for bed, but then I see these things, and they just make me as red as the shirt I'm wearing. So then I get to rant it out, Ryan, and I appreciate you being here to support me. Last thing I'll say, because then we get to move on to something else. Cam Rising, when he led this Utah offense, just a reminder, 38 points per game. Last year, that dropped to 23. I expect them to get over 30 once again. This is Cam Rising, one of the best quarterbacks to ever come through Utah. So I just think there are certain numbers that are hard to ignore about this Utah team, but people decide to do them. And yes, and once again, this isn't me getting red in the face because Utah's ranked 13th. It's me getting red when people be like, how is this Utah team deserving of being in the top 10 or the top 13? Because, Ryan, that is a perfect segue into what we are now talking about with Joel Klatt. Joel Klatt was high on Utah. Joel Klatt has Utah in his top 10. Joel Klatt talks about how Utah was riddled with injuries last year. And I see people on social media being like, why is this guy so into Utah? This doesn't make sense. This Utah team's not that good. And I just look at all the reasons I just laid out. How many teams would lose their best quarterback or does not have their best quarterback, their best pass rusher? Utah dealt with injuries in the running back room. And I know everyone deals with injuries, but top quarterback and pass catcher not playing a single down last season seems like a pretty big deal to me too. And that's without even mentioning all of the other injuries they dealt with. Heck, the Arizona game, they were without 3 of their top 4 defensive players, and the 4th, Sione Vaki, played the game sick. So I think Joel's got this absolutely right. And I think it's crazy for people to not understand why Utah belongs in this discussion.
JT is fired up. JT Wistricll, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, man. Fired up. I love it. Yeah, see, now I gotta start saying stuff now. I was just getting lost in your emotion, your passion. Brett McMurphy, I also saw he released his own version of a poll, and he had Utah at number 10.
He's an AP voter.
Yeah. And he had Utah at number 10. So, Joel Klatt loves Utah. He's like Kyle Whittingham is like his favorite human on this earth. So I think there is, if I'm speaking objectively, I think there's a little bit of bias there with Joel Klatt. That said, I do think people who watch college football, who really pay attention to college football, the coaches poll, they just have somebody fill it out for them most of the time. The people who really pay attention to college football, I think, are giving Utah their correct due, their deserving due. Yep. I guess we'll find out when the AP poll comes out. We'll see there where Utah's at. But yeah, I think as much as Joel Klatt, I think really likes Utah. He's a fan of Utah. I think he knows what he's talking about. And Brett McMurphy, I think, has an accurate read on what's going on. So, I think people who know what they're talking about know that Utah's a really good team. And we'll see. I will be interested in the AP poll, though, see where Utah's at.
There's, to your point, there's a reason most people use the AP poll. I think the AP poll, and this is still a pretty good reflection of how the season should go. I would nitpick a team here and a team there, but I've talked to AP poll voters before. I've heard about the process they go through to try to deliver the most accurate ranking they can. It's a pretty painstaking process. So I always feel better about that, even if, of course, there's going to be things you disagree when you're nitpicking about these teams and everything. You're right. Klatt likes Utah, but I feel like that bias that you kind of discussed was formed by covering this team, being around Kyle Whittingham, watching these players have success at that high level. I feel like it's not biased. I feel like it's just he has actually studied up on Utah versus I see like a lot of media who I think in the past they've just thought, Pac-12, not for me. And then they don't follow this team. So that's why I respect Joel Klatt, because I feel like he has put in the work. And there are other people who have put in the work and don't have Utah in the top 10. That's fine. But once again, I got fired up because I see people all the time who just don't understand why Utah is the Big 12 favorite. They don't understand why Utah is being ranked so highly. And I think it's pretty easy to form and make that connection. But it's going to be fun, Ryan, because we'll get to see it soon.
Yes, absolutely. The 29th, man, I got to look it up. Hold on.
Oh, now you want to know? Yeah, I thought is it August 29th?
I'm pretty sure it's August 29th. It's going to take me too long to look it up. But
yeah, we're closing in. We're closing in on the season, though. I can't wait till we get this Southern Utah game. It's been so much talk, right? We've been waiting and seeing until the season finally arrives, and soon all of this talk that gets me fired up, everyone fired up on their season previews, will soon be put to bed, and we can get back to just observing these teams and seeing, okay, this is what I say about them, and also this is what we actually need to see and know about them, because it's what they're going to put out onto the field. So I'm excited to have the season back. I think it's going to be a fantastic year coming up too. And Ryan, were you able to look up the date you wanted to? I thought it was the 29th or maybe
it's
26th.
The 29th. It is August 29th against the Southern Utah Thunderbirds. I'm getting ready.
We're all getting ready.
Football season is intense, busy, but I'm ready, JT.
For people who want to get even more, let's do it. And for people who want to get even more ready, Ryan, where should they head over to?
Segway master, JT Wistricll. Deseret.com. That's where all your Utah football needs are. My colleague Joe Coles does a great job covering Utah football. So shout out Joe A. Coles on Twitter or X or whatever you call it these days. And there you go, Deseret.com.
Ryan W. McDonald, appreciate you joining us. Make sure you guys give him a follow on X. Thanks again, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. Got a fun show coming up tomorrow. I was just fired up talking about all the false narratives about Utah. I joined Cam Stewart of Thank you again for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. And if you're in the market for a second listen, Locked On College Football has you covered with fall camp coverage all across the country. Make sure you guys check it out, and we'll see you back tomorrow on Locked On Utes.